Hello and welcome to our next piece of consumer behaviour. I've jumped ahead a bit to chapter 7 and the next bit will be chapter 8 for a particular reason, because this is a very important topic about persuading customers, and in the next one we actually look at the role of the internet and social media plays in this. So from the book chapter 7, what are we actually going to look at? How we actually communicate to our customers, how we can be effective. What's the difference between actually broadcasting to a general audience of customers compared to narrowcasting? How we can actually create messages that are persuasive. How effective are our messages? What are the limitations of what we're doing? How can we actually measure this? So one of the things people use in advertising is humour. This is a cultural aspect as well. It doesn't work in all countries, and we find that British advertising tends to have quite a lot of humour. Turkish advertising now has a very specific style of humour where they play on family dynamics. But other countries it doesn't work so well. Another thing that they do in America is scare people with advertising into doing up seatbelts in cars or not to do drunk driving or whatever. And so we see here an advertisement for luggage, the Delsey brand, and we see the airport worker carrying all the suitcases. So that's supposed to be funny. I don't really see it as that funny myself. And the next one we see dynamite wrapped up explosives, and it's done to resemble a human fist. So as I said, these are very cultural aspects and they're quite different in different countries. So you might want to think about your own TV advertising or billboard advertising, cinema advertising. Are any of the companies in your country actually using these techniques? And this is something you should do all the time as a student of consumer behaviour, is notice things when you go shopping, when you're watching television. Actually stay and watch the advertising breaks and see if you can actually apply any of the theory that we've been learning here and see how companies in your country are actually using it. Or if you watch foreign films as well. So different types of communication, and possibly as an undergraduate you studied a whole course about business communications. And we're looking here at the difference between formal and informal. And again, this is very cultural because America is a very informal country. People call their bosses by their first name, like John, or they're possibly not so formal with their teachers at school. They might even call their teachers by their first name. Whereas if we move into more Eastern countries, say particularly Japan as an example, the power distance between people in the top hierarchies, whether it's politics or a company, down to the actual workers, is very, very different. And so Britain is slightly more formal than America, but not so much so, whereas eastern parts of the globe, people are much more formal, would call their boss Mr. Smith or whatever. They might even bow in some countries. So again, when we're reading the textbooks that we use on master's programs, remember often that these are directed towards American, or even if they're international or European texts, again, many of the examples are American, and it's okay to disagree with the textbook. And so understand that their idea of it informal is very different maybe than what it is in your country. And the other difference in communication is impersonal compared to personal. So in the 1950s, when advertising first started, advertising was very generic. It was very based at everybody. And then with the advent of databases, companies realized that they could write people personal letters. So they would write a template letter, and then the computer would slot in the names from the databases. And for a while in the 1980s, people actually thought they were getting personal letters when it said, "Dear Mrs. Smith" or "Dear Mr. Jones." And later on they realised this was actually just output from computers, and they weren't so keen on it, and so you don't see that type of mail advertising it anymore. So the other thing that we look at is what will actually interfere with these communications. what actually stops our message coming across? There could be a problem with timing. With TV advertising, timing is very, very important. You know, there are very different viewers that watch daytime compared to like the large viewing figures that they might have in the evening. You pay more to advertise on a Friday or a Saturday evening compared to in the week. And like the most expensive advertising slot in the world is the gap in the American Super Bowl, you know, and the football games. And also in other countries, you know, the football at the weekend is so popular that people pay more to advertise in those slots. So that there could be all sorts of things going on. And so advertisers do different things to actually get their message across. So we see repetition. So one of the things that happens in Europe now is that repetition of the adverts continually, not just in each time slot, but within a time slot itself, you might, the first advertisement in that time slot might repeat itself after 2 or 3 different adverts, and it might repeat itself again. Or where we see the word contraster, the other thing they do is they'll have the first long advert, then there'll be some other people's adverts, then they repeat a shorter version of the advert. One of the things that's very annoying on British TV at the moment is they play the adverts at a sound level much, much higher than the programmes. And people complained, and the advertising people said, we have to do that to attract your attention, because in these advertising slots you get up and you do other things. But obviously if they're going to annoy us with very large sounds, that is also like an interference with the communication. So people are very much using digital technology, which we're going to look at in the next chapter, to get their message across. And so how are they going to position themselves, and how are they going to provide this value to the customer? So again, they might think about what channel that they're advertising on. The idea of multiple channels still seems odd to me, because I grew up with, you know, with only possibly like 3 channels on the television in Britain at that time. Now we have many, many channels, and so an advertiser might think, I'm advertising paint, so I might not want to advertise that generally. Maybe I'll advertise that on a lifestyle channel where we're actually doing house makeovers, and so more people will be interested in buying paint or whatever. Or maybe there's a pet channel, and so you advertise dog food on the pet channel rather than advertise it in a very expensive main channel. So that's another sort of thing that people do to get their message across. So as I said earlier, as a consumer behaviour student, I really want you to think about your own habits, because this is a topic where you can apply the theory that you're reading and look at yourself, other members of your household, how they actually decide on small purchases, large purchases, even things as simple as you selecting a shampoo from the shelf. Why did you pick that actual one? Why that one? What attracted you? Did you think about the price? Did you think about reading the small print on the bottle? That type of thing. So informal sources tend to be very strongly the people around us in our own family or our peer group at school or at work, because we're in contact with these people. We have informal chats. Somebody might say they've tried a new product and they liked it, or that they didn't like it, and then that affects you as a consumer. Even with large purchases, you might ask somebody who has a car, what's your car like? Are you happy with it? Are you glad that you actually bought that model? Are you glad you bought that brand? Are you glad that you bought from that dealer, you know, before they actually make a purchase? And again, with electrical goods or white goods in the kitchen, you might actually ask people in your family what they would suggest. Are they happy? And so these are the type of informal sources that we have. So looking now at the difference between broadcasting and narrowcasting, which I think you probably already understand. So what's the comparison? So we have to now understand that because of the internet and social media, that communication to customers has changed immensely. And so when we talk about traditional media, we're thinking about broadcast television. So most countries have a television channel that's owned by the government, and then private channels as well. And so they broadcast digitally now in most countries, but to the general public. And so this broadcasting is one way. It's done in television studios like this, and the signal, sometimes they're recorded programs, sometimes they're actual live programs, but the adverts go out in the breaks between these programs. So they directed generically at very large groups of the population, and they're not interactive. It's just a message that goes out, and they don't customize them. You know, they are very generic, aimed at everybody. And there is feedback. Sometimes people might not like an advert. I actually complained about an advert for the first time this year. And so you don't get the feedback straight away. So with new media, with watching streaming channels, YouTube channels, looking at adverts that are actually online, this becomes very narrow because they're selecting you, because not everybody is watching that YouTube channel. It's a very small number of people. So if they advertise through that, they're advertising directly at you personally. It can be two-way, because if we're actually online, we might then choose to click and move to the website that this advertisement belongs to. So they tend to be customized because they have a very specialized audience of whoever's actually chosen to watch this video. And there could possibly be an interactive advert as well. And because of the way that we can count where people are clicking, where on the page people are clicking, we can actually measure response to our advert as well. So do we need to work very hard on the design of a message for it to actually be persuasive? And how do we do that? So messages can be verbal, because we do understand this idea of communication, like me speaking to you now, is that human beings use verbal communication, but you can see that people like myself, we actually also use gestures. And so people can actually communicate without speaking at all through the use of hand gestures. Of course, signals, again, culturally can be different from one part of the world to another, but in general we could understand, that means stop or whatever. And as we saw in an earlier chapter, human beings are very visual as well, and so they respond to a picture, to a photograph, possibly more quickly than they do to actually reading the written word. And again, if something's written down, it's not the same as if it's spoken. That message has to be very clear. So I think, when you're talking to people, it's a lot easier to talk face-to-face to somebody than it is to actually talk on the telephone, because you can actually take from their gestures the meaning of what they're trying to say to you. So whoever wants to make this advert, this communication, they have to understand the following points: that they need people to be aware of their product or service. That's the whole point, isn't it? That's why we advertise, why we promote things. We want people to know, look, this exists, do you want it? So this will then obviously promote sales of this service or of this product, and we want to encourage people to buy it. We see the word discourage as well, because remember, some advertising is from the government. It could be from a health body actually telling us not to eat fatty foods, or not to drink cola, or to wear our seatbelts. So it's not just about actual real life products that make profit. Communication and advertising can also be about other issues. So we want to attract customers, patronage, and we want to reduce dissonance. We want people to be very clear what is actually happening. And we want to create a goodwill, a favourable image of our company, our product, of our service. So one of the things we need to do then is select the medium. So what do we mean by medium? Well, generally, we meant broadcast television, radio, and print, magazines and newspapers, billboards. In places like Britain, they heavily use the insides of buses and trains to advertise as well, or inside government buildings. So that would be the medium, because these days, we'll talk about it in the next chapter, there's also social media, or which social media, or all of it, what you're actually trying to do. And then you actually design the message that you're actually going to send out. So more detail, generally this tends to be images with some short text written on top in a font that's easy to read, because I don't know if you know anything about fonts. I mean, these existed before computers. People actually designed how they would write in newspapers 2 centuries ago, at the beginning of printing. So there are some ways of writing letters that are much easier to read on screen than they are on paper. And people like Microsoft have spent millions of dollars researching fonts that are easy to read on both paper and actually on screen. So older people like myself find it much easier to read on paper. Younger people, from using smartphones, tablets, computers, they actually find it easy to read on screen. What type of message is it? And is there an order to it as well that you actually want to present in? So here we see an advert. It actually says it's non-verbal, but you can actually see that there's a small piece of text saying swine flu, we'll beat you. Because it's basically for tissues to stop the spread of diseases. We had high incidences of swine flu and bird flu in different countries, and the government persuaded us to use hand gels to clean our hands, you know, and to use tissues to wipe your nose so that you don't actually spread germs everywhere. So that's the idea of a non-verbal advert. So why do you need a positive message? Where is it that you need a negative message? So I mentioned this earlier on, actually, that in general, we obviously want people to be very positive. But there are instances when we are very negative. So, for example, in Britain at the moment, there's very negative advertising about the welfare of people in poorer countries to sort of scare you into sending money to charities or whatever. Or they show you pictures of injured pets because they want you to send money to their charity to look after pets. So this is an example of a two-sided message, because it's telling you two things. So this is again an American advert. There's actually a product in America called I Can't Believe It's Not Butter, in the typical way that they brand things. It exists in other places as well now, but it is an American product. So it's margarine, but instead of calling it X or Y margarine, they've decided to reference the butter, i.e. the taste of it doesn't taste like a margarine, it actually tastes like butter. So they're telling you that the taste is very good, and they're doing that in the branding, in the name of it. I can't believe it's not butter. They're telling you it tastes great, like butter, you can't tell the difference. But at the same time, the second message is it's better for your health. Why? Because it's a margarine, so it's different types of fat. Margarine is fat, but it's a different type of fat than you get in animal products. And so they're saying that, you know, it's actually better for your health. So leave the butter behind, you'll be healthier and you won't lose the taste. So that's what they mean by a two-sided message. And so the order that you actually put adverts out in, sometimes an advert is based on something that's happened very recently, like the presidential election. And so that can only actually go out now, as it were, you know, in a couple of months. That advert isn't going to work. And so you tend to find with generic adverts that they don't mention anything that's going on in the news or in the world, because they want to use that advert in different parts of the world, and they want to use it for a long time. Because even though we have digital technology, it's still very expensive to film a TV advert. So how effective are our communications, and what are the actual limitations? So particularly in America, they use comparative advertising. It's actually illegal in Britain. So in America, I might own a pizza shop, and I'm actually allowed to say to you, buy my pizza, so that shop down there, his pizza's no good. Which, when the first time I saw these adverts, I thought they were very strange, because in the UK, we're not allowed to do that type of advertising at all. So the advert picked out on the right there, it's saying this Aleve is a pill that puts 4 different things together. So what they're saying is, you know, it's a combined medicine. Instead of buying a Panadol or, paracetamol, or something for your throat, something for your aches and pains, everything is in the one package. So comparative advertising does have this element of negation, doesn't it? Because they're saying the other product's no good, the other service is no good, they're being negative. Supposedly it's sophisticated. I don't know. As I said, you know, in the UK it's not even allowed. So, you know, is that something that you would actually think about? Yeah, we're talking about fearful adverts. So this is the idea of explaining to people that you shouldn't text and drive at the same time. This must be a problem in a huge amount of countries where people are using their mobile phones while they're actually driving. Of course, it's an offence and it's very dangerous. I myself lost 4 friends in a car accident 2 years ago because a woman in a different car was actually on Facebook posting things and actually landed on top of their car and killed all of them outright. But this isn't really a very scary advert, is it? We can see, you know, like there's a human body. I suppose she has a limb missing, I don't know. And then we see like her photo with the driving licence there. So again, this would be very specific to that country with that style of driving licence. So yes, there are quite a lot of adverts from the sort of transport directives, you know, telling you to buckle up. I think in Britain they had one with a motorcycle rider, and it was so horrific they actually had to pull it off the TV. There's quite a few like that actually telling you to make the children in the seats behind use their seatbelts as well, or they might fly through the air and kill you like in an accident. So these fearful adverts, what are they actually doing? The understanding that you're going to react to them. They're going to make you anxious, and they repeat and repeat and repeat. So yeah, there's anti-drug adverts like this as well to stop people drinking or to stop taking drugs. And so they actually use scare tactics. So another thing that can work is humour, because humour is very personal. Not everybody finds the same things funny. I can watch those American comedy films and not laugh at all, because American sense of humour is very different. British humour tends to be very dark, very sarcastic. We don't put the canned laughter on the programmes like the American does. It's up to you, like whether you want to laugh or not. So anyway, this is an advertisement for a hotel showing you that while you relax on your sunbed, that your children have plenty of things to do in the pool. So I'm not really seeing like what's particularly funny about that. Lots of advertising uses sex to actually sell things, and again, I think that the laws in Europe are a lot stronger of what's allowed and what is not allowed, because we see this type of advertising again much more in the United States. So you might want to put an advert out because something happens. So for example, Volkswagen had problems with their exhaust systems, that they'd been recording incorrectly the amount of exhaust fumes or whatever. And so possibly after that, they might have wanted to make an advert explaining to people that they'd put everything right, but they didn't. But that type of thing, to make people feel more comfortable with the service or product after an accident or after something actually happened. So how can we measure that our adverts are effective? Do you have any ideas? So we can get feedback immediately from customers while they're actually in a shop, or by asking them about the service. So I think recently in the UK, I took a SIM card for my telephone, and that actual organisation, within seconds of me putting the SIM card in, had sent me a questionnaire to ask me what the service had been like in the shop. So that would be the idea of like very, very immediate feedback. Other ways of getting feedback are through online surveys. It's very popular now for people to sign up with a research company, and you get sent questionnaires to fill in where you actually make your comments about different products or services, and so through that people can actually find out about how effective their advertising is. So that's the end of chapter 7 from the book, and the next one, chapter 8, is following on from this but actually looking at digital media. Thank you.